it doesn't mean the same thing that we mean when we're talking casually. Like, what's your point of view? What's your perspective? What's your opinion on something? When we say point of view in literature, it means something very specific. The formal definition is that point of view is the mode of narration that the author uses. The most common of these are first person, second person, third person limited, and third person omniscient. These are the majority of the ones that you're going to see, and these are the ones that you need to understand. We can even take second person out because second person is very handy, but it's very rarely used when you're writing literature. Second person uses the form you. It's used in letter writing or in commands. I can say, you go over there and pick up this book, or you need to do this, or you need to do that. Or if I'm writing a letter to somebody, I can say, you should come and visit me, which is a very useful point of view to have, but it makes for a very boring book if the entire thing is a letter or a series of commands. So the three that we're down to, first person and then third person limited and third person omniscient, the difference between these have to do with subjectivity versus objectivity. The word omniscient means all-knowing, and this is when an author writes as if there's some sort of presence that can see everything that's going on in all places, that knows characters' thoughts and their motivations, that is all-knowing, all-seeing, and able to look at the big picture. In the opening chapter of The Grapes of Wrath, John Steinbeck uses this form in order to give you a big picture. He says, to the red country and part of the gray country of Oklahoma, the last rains came gently, and they did not cut the scarred earth. The plows crossed and recrossed the rivulet marks. The last rains lifted the corn quickly and scattered weed colonies and grass along the sides of the road, so that the gray country and the dark red country began to disappear under a green cover. There is no narrator that we can see of that uses I or me or my, so it's clearly third person. And this idea of before he even gets to the characters, he's zooming over the countryside, seeing the rain, seeing the terrain. It seems to imply that this is third person omniscient because it's almost like a god figure that's looking down on everything, that can see the whole territory. And it gives it this feeling of largeness, of objectivity, of almost godlike power. Contrast that with The Giver. The Giver is an example of third person limited because it sticks with one main character, even though it still uses the names or he or she or they, which are all keywords for third person. It doesn't move away from this one main character. It was almost December and Jonas was beginning to be frightened. No, wrong word, Jonas thought. Frightened meant that deep, sickening feeling of something terrible about to happen. Frightened was the way he'd felt a year ago when an unidentified aircraft had overflown the community twice. He had seen it both times. Squinting toward the sky, he'd seen the sleek jet, almost a blur at its high speed, go past, and a second later heard the blast of sound that followed. Then one more time, a moment later from the opposite direction. The same plane. It's still third person because it's not using a personal narrator, but at the same time we're limited to what Jonas knows, to what Jonas feels. We're following his character. We're limited in that way, which is what makes it third person limited. And then finally we have first person, which uses pronouns like I, me, and my to clue you in that the story is being told from the perspective of a narrator. I am an invisible man. No, I'm not a spook like those who haunted Edgar Allan Poe, nor am I one of your Hollywood movie ectoplasms. I am a man of substance, of flesh and bone, fiber and liquids, and I might even be said to possess a mind. I am invisible, understand simply because people. First person is the easiest one to figure out because it has so many keywords, because those pronouns, I, me, my, and so on, are clearly markers that it's first person. The only thing you need to watch out for is when those pronouns are used in quotation marks in dialogue. You could say, Ralph said, I am going to the store. That's not first person because the story isn't being told from a narrator. that one character is saying that in first person. It's a good rule of thumb that the further away you get from one individual character, the more objective your story will be. In many different first-person stories, you can't always trust the person who's telling the story because they're what's called an unreliable narrator. For instance, in The Invisible Man, by the time the main character tells you this story, he's gone insane from a series of different hospital experiments that have gone wrong, to injuries, to just life trauma. Everything he says, you have to filter through the idea that you're being told this story through a person who's not altogether up. With The Giver, you're very much in Jonas's emotions. You feel what he feels, you feel all of these things, and because there are so many feelings and such a limited perspective, you don't get the full truth of what's going on. In The Grapes of Wrath, you're more objective. You get the big picture. You get what's going on with the main character and with the families, and then you get what's going on at a farm over here and what's going on in another part of the country. Because you have that third-person omniscient perspective, you're getting more information, and it's helping you get a more objective and less subjective point of view. And these are used for different purposes. You see a lot of young adult fiction is written in first person because they want to make you feel for the character. And when you use the word I or me or my, it's very easy to associate I am this person. This is how I feel. These are my opinions. And so with The Invisible Man, his main purpose is to make you feel the struggle that this man's gone through. In The Giver, they want to show you how Jonas is struggling with these emotions of growing up and realizing that everything he's trusted can't be relied on. But in The Grapes of Wrath, he wants you to understand what's going on throughout the whole country, to see the entire system of the country, to show you how the country has let down people like the Joad family. And the struggle that they're going through is also the struggle that millions of families were going through. One of these is not better than the other, they're just used for different purposes. And oftentimes, third person feels more objective, but it's not always. For instance, with nonfiction, you can write articles in first person or you can write them in third person. And first person is going to very clearly show that this is your opinion and this is the way you are feeling. But with third person, you can hide those opinions a little bit easier. I can state those opinions as if they were fact and make you feel like this is objective when it's not really. So when you're figuring out point of view, remember to look for the pronouns. Make sure that you're asking yourself, is this limited to one person or to one group of people? And then finally, do I know things that I wouldn't know otherwise? Always remember to question the narrator if there's a narrator. Is there a reason that the narrator is saying this? And finally, remember that the narrator is not always the author. The Fault in Our Stars was written by an adult man, not a teenage girl with cancer. Just because a person is using I and me and my does not mean that they are the narrator. There's often a very different life experience between the two of them. Just because the narrator believes something doesn't mean the author believes something. Holden Caulfield, for most of this book, is a total jerk and a loser. J.D. Salinger is using that in order to prove a point, to show how grief and how sadness has made Holden Caulfield that way. He's not saying that we should all be like Holden. He's showing him as an example of something that we want to avoid, something that we don't want to fall into. So just remember that point of view is a tool. Depending on what you want to get out of it, you'll use a different point of view. If you're writing a research paper, you're not going to use first person point of view because it feels too casual, too informal. You're going to use third person point of view to write a research paper. If I want to get more emotions and feelings from you, maybe in a creative writing piece or in an opinion article, I'm going to use first person because it helps you connect with me. So in addition to identifying, is this author using first, second, third limited, or third omniscient, ask yourself why. Why would an author want to use this mode? What are they trying to convince me of? And how is that working or not working?